Hello, good evening. Welcome back, everybody. This is my first ever Flight Simulator 2024 tutorial video. I'm very excited. We're going to be covering how to set up the drone camera, how to map your controls to a controller of your choice, and how to use it so that you too can create some cinematic shots, much like the ones that you're seeing on your screen right now. There's only one thing that you're going to need: a controller. I like to use a PlayStation controller, but you can use an Xbox controller or a controller that is PC branded. Just make sure that you have it plugged in and make sure that your sim recognizes it, because we're going to be mapping the controls for the drone specifically to that device so that they don't interfere with anything else, such as a flight yoke or anything else that you might be using to fly within the simulator. As always, if you found this tutorial useful, or if you're simply enjoying my content, please give a like on the video, drop a comment down below, and click the subscribe button so that you know when I go live or when I post new content. And with that being said, if you're all plugged in and ready to go, let's jump right into it. So the first thing that we are going to do is you're going to go up to the top right of your screen and you're going to click the cogwheel to go into your controls, which are listed right in the middle here. When you get there, when you have your controller plugged in, you'll see on the left your device list. I have multiple devices because I have my throttle and my yoke plugged in, but then I also have this X input gamepad. I don't know why it says that, but that is my controller that I'm using. On the right, it shows an Xbox controller, but everything I'm mapping is being mapped on a PlayStation 4 controller. So if you have a controller plugged in and you have multiple inputs like I do here, you're going to have to figure out which one is actually your controller. I don't know why for me it lists both of them, but the top one for me is the one that actually controls my drone. So if I go into it, I select it, and now I'm going to be editing the controls pertaining to the drone camera, which we're going to be mapping to the controller. I, as a personal preference, only have my drone camera mapped to my controller. I don't fly with it. I don't do anything in the game with it. The only thing I use it for is when I'm making videos or making content, and everything else is done on my mouse and keyboard and on my joystick and throttle. Once you have the controller selected, I'm going to go over to the camera settings, which are, find them here, listed about halfway, 3/4 of the way down. I'm going to click it, and the nice thing about FS 2024 is it actually has all of the cameras broken up into different sections here. And the only ones that I have mapped are the ones to my controller, and these are going to be the ones that you're also going to want to map so that you can effectively use the drone camera when you're trying to get cinematic shots within the simulator. One thing that did change this year with FS 2024 as opposed to FS 2020 is that in FS 2020 with the drone camera, you had to map the tessellation to the left, the tessellation to the right, the tessellation forward, and the tessellation backwards. Those have all been switched to an axis in Flight Simulator 2024, and these controls that I have mapped here are reflective of that. So these controls that I have mapped here are obviously my preference. You can play around with them and change them if you like. This is what I find works best for me, and this is the same controller setup that I have used in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, again, minus the difference in the axis. So I'm going to go through these controls here, and I'll quickly give a brief description of what they do, and then I'll also include some footage here so you can see exactly what it looks like when you're using the drone camera in the sim. So starting with drone depth of field, which is a toggle, I have it set to what maps as B and Y. On a PlayStation controller, that is circle and triangle. This basically toggles if whether or not you want to have the depth of field on. So if you have a plane in the foreground and you have, say, mountains in the background, you can toggle the depth of field, and then you can adjust the depth of field so that way you can have the plane in focus or you can have the mountains in the focus, and you can play around with that. That is a toggle on and off. Toggle foreground blur. You can hit the B button, which is mapped on the PlayStation controller as circle, with left on the D-pad. This again is a toggle as to whether or not you want to blur whatever is in the foreground. To be completely honest, I don't really use either of those. Drone top-down view. This is a quick snap to the top-down view. It maps as X and Y, which on a PlayStation controller is square plus triangle. Toggle drone auto exposure. So in the settings below, there is a manual setting for manipulating the exposure. This simply sets it back to auto, so that way if you get it, out of focus, or if you get it so that the exposure is way too high and you can't correct it, it will toggle it automatically to get it back to where it should be. I have this mapped to Y with pressing down on the left joystick. On the PlayStation controller, that maps to triangle with pushing down on the left joystick. Toggle drone autofocus, I have mapped to B and pushing down on the left joystick. On a PlayStation controller, that is circle, pushing down on the left joystick. The drone roll axis, which is rotation around the, let me think here, it would be the X axis. is left bumper with the right and left stick. In previous settings of Microsoft 2020, this was actually set to left bumper and right bumper. However, in 2024, this is set to an axis, so I mapped it to left bumper with right and left on the joystick. When you hold the left bumper down on a PlayStation controller, that will be L1, and move the right joystick right and left. Your drone will roll about the... wait, now that I think about it, yeah, it'll be the x-axis. It's still the x-axis. Decrease drone rotational speed. The next ones are very crucial for mapping. You can increase or decrease the rotational speed. So if you're flying alongside a plane and you're trying to get a very nice smooth pan or a nice smooth rotation, you can increase or decrease the speed that you want it to be at so that you can find it. So that way, if you have the joystick cranked all the way over, it'll only go at a certain speed. Decrease drone rotation speed, I have mapped to X, which is square, and the right bumper. And for the opposite, I have it set, if you want to increase the drone rotation speed, I have it set to X with the left bumper. Decrease drone translation speed. So this is the speed at which the drone flies around. I have this one set to mapping with X, which is square on the controller with the right trigger, or decrease the speed. And then I have it on the inverse as X with the left trigger to increase the speed. Decrease drone depth of field, so you can draw it out or bring it back in. This is set to B with the left trigger for a decrease, and this is set to B with the right trigger for an increase. That maps out to circle on the PlayStation controller. Decrease drone exposure. This is the manual exposure setting that is mapped to Y with the left bumper and right bumper for the exposure. Increase drone rotation speed. We already talked about that. Increase drone translation speed. We already talked about that. Lock drone to next target is the left bumper with the right on the D-pad. That is L1 on the PlayStation controller with right on the D-pad. Lock drone to previous target is L1 on the PlayStation controller, left bumper on the Xbox controller with left on the D-pad. That will simply lock you to, if you have multiple planes, like if you're using the ghost recording, you can have a ghost recording and you can lock between different targets that you want to lock onto. Drone in/out rewind and drone in/out play. I don't use very much, but basically you can actually set a recording path for the drone. I don't find I very much use it. I do everything in real time, but I just mapped these because I did have them mapped in the previous one, and I figured it was just easier to do it all now than try and come back and do it later. Reset drone roll. So if you increase the drone roll speed too quick or too slow, or you can't figure out where you want it and you just want to start over, left bumper, right bumper on an Xbox controller, that maps out to L1 and R1 on the PlayStation controller. Reset drone target offset. So there, when you by default lock onto an airplane, there is an offset to that airplane. You can obviously manipulate it with tessellation. However, if you want to snap back to where you were, it's going to be X and A on an Xbox controller, which translates to square and X on the PlayStation. Sorry, X and A on the Xbox controller, which translates to square and A on the PlayStation controller. Set drone bookmark in, bookmark out. Again, if you're setting a waypoint of where you want to fly to, like if you have a set, you can actually plan a path. I don't use these very much. However, I do have them set to A with the left bumper and the right bumper, respectively. On the PlayStation controller, that would be X with the L1 and R1 bumpers. Set drone target. This one, again, if you have multiple targets, you can pick the target that you want, and then you can jump between them. I have this mapped to X on the controller with a click on the left joystick. I don't use that very much. On a PlayStation controller, that translates to square with a push down on the left joystick. Toggle drone follow mode. This one's very important. Push down on the right joystick for both controllers. What this will do is if you have your plane sitting on the runway or flying and you want the drone camera to stay with that airplane, you can still manipulate it. You can still tessellate around. You can roll. You can do whatever. But say you're trying to get a nice view of an airplane flying through the air. This will allow the drone camera to follow it, and you can actually manipulate it and then rotate around the plane. It's very handy. All the shots, for the most part, in the starting of the video that you saw were done this way. At the same time, if you wanted to set the drone to a fixed point, if you click the right joystick down, it will not follow the airplane, and you could map it somewhere, say on a taxiway, if you wanted to get a shot of an airplane taxiing over you, or on a runway if you wanted to get a shot of an airplane landing, and then you click the joystick again and it'll lock back onto the airplane and move with it. Toggle the drone lock mode is A with the left joystick. To be completely honest, I believe that just completely locks the controls. I've never used it. A on the Xbox controller obviously is X on the PlayStation controller with a push on the left joystick. Drone pitch axis, forward and backwards, is pretty self-explanatory. It's pitch up, pitch down. Again, in 2020, this was set to 2 separate controls. In 2024, they actually have it on an axis. So this will rotate you along the Y-axis for your pitch. Drone yaw axis, the rotation about the Z axis is left and right on the right stick. So your pitch is up and down, your yaw is left and right, which is a rotation around the Z axis. So if you wanted to rotate left and right. Drone X translation axis is the left and right movement of the drone. This was 2 separate controls in 2020. It is now a lateral axis. I have it mapped to the left stick, left and right. And then the drone Z translation axis, which is forward and backwards, I have set to the left joystick, forward and backwards. Translate the drone down is the left trigger, which is the L2 bumper on the PlayStation controller. That's pretty self-explanatory. Translate the drone up or increase your altitude is the right trigger on the Xbox controller and the R2 bumper on your PlayStation controller. And the last 2 that I use tons and tons are the increase drone zoom, which is the right D-pad on the PlayStation controller. You can map that also to the right D-pad, or sorry, to the D-pad on the Xbox controller. And the decrease the drone zoom is the left on the D-pad, which is the same for both controllers. That will increase or decrease your zoom. So for certain shots, if you want more depth of field, you'll bring the drone out backwards by moving it or tessellating it using the left stick to wherever you want to get it to, and then you zoom in and it'll create depth of field. So there's lots of things you can do with that. That is it for the drone controls. Again, play around with it, see if you like it. And from there you can change it. And after that, it's just a matter of going in and playing around in the sim using the drone camera. I'll quickly show you how to get to the drone camera once we load here into a flight. Okay, so we have loaded into a flight. I've just loaded into the Florida area for the purposes of this tutorial. And I'm going to show you how to get to the drone camera. So the drone camera is also called the showcase camera, and to access it, the best way to do it, I find, is to go to your top bar, go to the camera settings here, and then you can pick the showcase camera. As soon as you're in the showcase camera, you are now effectively in the drone camera. So if we click the right R2 trigger on the PlayStation controller, that will tessellate us up and down. If I do the left trigger on the controller, it'll bring me back down. If I push forward on the left joystick, it brings me forward. If I pull it back, it will pull me backwards. If I push it to the right, it'll move me to the right. And if I push it to the left, it will move me to the left. Those are the ways that you move the drone camera around. On the right joystick, we mapped the Z, X, and Y axis. So if I push forward on the right stick, I pitch up. If I push down on the right stick, I bring it back down. And if I push it to the left, obviously my view rotates to the left. And if I push it to the right, my view rotates to the right. If I hold the L1 bumper on the controller, and then I rotate the right stick right and left, that is our roll axis. So if I push left, the camera will do a roll as such, counterclockwise. And if I hold it the opposite direction, it will roll clockwise all the way around to 360. Okay, if we are over here and I am looking at the plane from here, if I push right on the D-pad as we had mapped in the controller settings there, it will zoom in. So as you can see, we create depth of field by doing that. If I was back here, I could actually bring the drone up and I could sit right at the front of the airplane if I wanted to. And obviously it's a good shot of the airplane. We have the background there, but there's not a whole lot of depth to it. It's basically, the plane in the foreground, and then the background is very, very close. However, if we bring it back and we zoom in, we now create quite a bit of depth of field because, as you can see, we have the background and you have the airplane in the front. And to get your shots, you play around with this and figure out exactly what it is that you're looking for. They did not fix the issues where in 2020, right, if you're here, obviously everything is very clear. When you zoom in, everything gets blurry. That only really becomes an issue if you're trying to get a shot on the runway because as I zoom in, the textures get blurry. There's no way to fix it. I have played around with almost every setting that I could to try and figure it out. It just kind of is what it is. One thing that you'll have to notice is that when you're in this camera setting here, you cannot control the airplane. So even though the airplane's on the ground, if I'm moving my joystick right now, I cannot do anything to the airplane. How we fix that is I like to go into, let's just do the external camera for fun. And I use, the nice thing about this is the flight camera recorder, which is embedded now in FS 2024. And for the purposes of this, I'm just going to take a quick video of us flying so that I can show you how I would make some cinematic shots of the airplane. So bear with me here. I'm going to fly a quick path and then I'll come back and I'll give you a bit of a tutorial. So right now I am on the normal airplane camera, the external camera. I'm not controlling the airplane. The flight recorder is doing it. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the showcase here. And as you can see, I am now in the drone camera and I'm following the airplane. One control that I talked about when I was mapping was following the airplane, which was a push of the right joystick. So right now we're obviously following the airplane. I can rotate around the outside of the aircraft using my left and right joystick, but ultimately it continues to follow the airplane. If I click the right joystick, you will notice that I stop moving and the airplane continues. So you'll see that the airplane's down there and I am stuck back here. If I click the right joystick again, it starts to move me. However, I'm now quite a far ways away from it. If you hold square or, if you hold square on the PlayStation controller and we mapped the speeds of tessellation to the left and right trigger, if I squeeze the left trigger, I'm able to move very quickly. And if I hold square and squeeze the right trigger, it slows me down quite a bit to the point where I can actually be pretty much stopped so that I can't move around whatsoever. I'm going to quickly reverse this here just so I have some time to play around with it and show you. Click play. Okay, so right now, if I push the left joystick, I can't move because I have stopped it. If you hold square and hit the left trigger, it will increase the speed so that I can actually essentially travel as fast as I want, right? This camera is too quick if I wanted to try and do, say, a nice pano shot, right? Let's say I wanted to rotate around the outside of the aircraft. That is much too quick. So if I hold square and I hold the right trigger, it will slow me right down. And I can put it so I can't move at all. And then I can give it one left click on the trigger and it goes slower, a little bit faster is nice. Now, if we wanted to, we can get a nice rotational view of the airplane. And we can do a bunch of different things, right? I could do it so that I'm down below and I'm looking up at it. I could do it so that I'm going up and over. And I could zoom right in and get some nice cinematic shots of the airplane, right? There's a number of things that we could do. It's going to go by the building here. Oh, we get a nice shot with the buildings behind it. You just have to play around with it, see what works for you, and over time, you'll get a knack for it, you'll get an eye for it, and you'll be able to create some pretty cool cinematic photography using the drone camera. As always, everybody, if you've enjoyed this video or found it useful, please leave a comment down below saying so. I appreciate you watching. Drop a like on the video, click the subscribe button so you know when I post new content, and I will catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.